Spain's Prime Minister is proposing a 100% tax for those buying property from outside the European Union. Will this help fix the country's housing crisis, or will it drive away investment?
Imagine trying to rent an apartment in Madrid or Barcelona and finding out that half your salary won't even cover a one-bedroom flat. Imagine having a stable job, but still needing roommates well into your 30s. Or worse, living with your parents because rent is impossible. This isn't just a bad dream for millions of Spaniards. It's their reality. You might have heard about Spain's housing problems, but let's be clear, it's worse than you think. Housing prices are soaring, rent is out of control, and young people are locked out of the market. Meanwhile, thousands sleep on the streets. Families are evicted daily, and investors treat homes like assets rather than places to live. So how did we get here, and is there a way out? Let's break down why Spain's housing crisis is spiraling and why it's not just a housing problem, but a national emergency.
Going next to the Spanish island of Ibiza and the soaring cost of a place to live there. In many parts of Spain, rental costs have risen steeply in recent years. But in the tourist hotspot of Ibiza, the rise has been magnified by the influx of foreign visitors.
You could buy a home in Madrid for €220,000 a decade ago. Today, that price has surged past €400,000. Rents have exploded too, increasing by over 50% in major cities since 2015. In Barcelona, the average rent is now €1,200 per month, up from just €800 a decade ago. For many, these numbers are entirely unmanageable. Spain's average salary is around €27,000 per year, far lower than in other Western European countries. That means renting a one-bedroom apartment in a major city can quickly consume over 50% of a person's income. Buying a home isn't much more straightforward. Spanish banks typically require a 20% down payment, meaning you'd need to save at least €80,000 to buy a modest apartment in Madrid. With wages stagnating and inflation rising, that's a nearly impossible goal for most young workers. Meanwhile, homelessness is rising, with over 28,000 people living on the streets, a figure that has doubled in the past decade. Thousands more live in precarious housing, including overcrowded apartments, substandard rentals, and illegal settlements. At the same time, foreign investors and real estate funds are snatching up properties, turning entire neighborhoods into short-term rentals. In cities like Malaga and Valencia, entire buildings have been transformed into Airbnbs, driving locals out and making housing even scarcer. This is not just a crisis, it's a catastrophe. You could say the Spanish housing crisis is the result of multiple overlapping problems. First, there's a severe lack of affordable housing. Spain simply isn't building enough homes, and those being built are often luxury apartments rather than affordable ones. Next, there are just too many foreign investors dominating the market. Hedge funds, investment firms, and wealthy foreigners are buying properties and increasing prices. Most importantly, there's the problem of its broken economic model. Spain is suffering from a tourism-driven housing crunch. Short-term rentals have worsened things by removing thousands of homes from the long-term rental market. Even worse, the stagnant wages and precarious employment situation mean that even well-educated workers struggle to afford a decent home. The result? A generation locked out of homeownership, a rental market in crisis, and thousands of people being forced into homelessness.
Owning a house has been traditionally one of the main aspirations here in Spain. In 2011, 80% of Spaniards lived in their own houses. Now, only 36% of those under 35 own their own homes.
Spain's housing crisis didn't happen overnight. It has its roots in the country's past economic policies and real estate booms. To understand why Spain is facing such a severe housing crisis today, we need to go back to the early 2000s, when the country was riding high on one of its biggest real estate booms. homes. Back then, Spain's economy was booming. The banks were handing out mortgages like candy, and buying a home seemed like the most brilliant investment anyone could make. It was the golden era of real estate. Developers were building at a breakneck pace, and the government encouraged homeownership with tax incentives and easy access loans. Foreign investors, especially from the UK and Germany, poured their money into vacation homes and rental properties, driving prices even higher. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Between 1997 and 2007, house prices in Spain tripled. The construction industry alone made up 13% of the country's GDP, providing jobs for over 2.5 million people. Spain built more homes per year than Germany, France, and the UK combined. It was a real estate frenzy. Then came 2008. When the U.S. housing market collapsed, the shockwaves hit Spain hard. Practically overnight, the banks throwing out mortgages slammed on the brakes and loans dried up. Property prices nosedived, plunging more than 40% in some areas. Massive construction projects were abandoned midway, leaving entire neighborhoods half-built and lifeless. But the worst part? People lost their jobs. And with that, they lost their homes. Once the backbone of Spain's economic boom, the construction industry collapsed overnight. More than 1.7 million workers found themselves unemployed. The national unemployment rate soared from 8% in 2007 to 26% by 2013, the highest in Europe. Youth unemployment was even worse, with 1 in 2 young people unable to find work. Suddenly, families who once believed in the dream of homeownership were facing a nightmare. Evictions skyrocketed. Over 700,000 families were forced out of their homes between 2008 and 2015. And unlike some countries where you walk away from a mortgage if you default, Spain's system meant that despite losing their homes, people still owed massive debts to the bank. It was financial devastation on a personal level. But while ordinary Spaniards lost everything, banks and real estate giants quietly took over. Like Blackstone, hedge funds and private equity firms swooped in and bought thousands of repossessed homes at dirt-cheap prices. Instead of selling them back to struggling families, they turned them into high-priced rentals, luxury apartments, or short-term vacation rentals.
Ibiza is preparing for the summer tourist season. Its beaches and resorts have long been a magnet for holidaymakers, but its success has helped create a housing crisis.
And who can blame them? Tourism is one of Spain's biggest industries. Unfortunately, it's become one of the most significant contributors to the housing crisis. Platforms like Airbnb have transformed once affordable neighborhoods into tourist hotspots. In Barcelona alone, there are over 18,000 short-term rental listings, many owned by big investment firms rather than local landlords. The result? Locals are being priced out of their neighborhoods and forced to move to the outskirts while their former homes are rented to tourists. Cities like Palma de Mallorca, Ibiza, and Malaga have been hit especially hard. What were once working-class neighborhoods are now filled with luxury apartments catering to wealthy visitors. And while some cities have introduced regulations to limit short-term rentals, enforcement remains weak. And that's where the roots of today's crisis took hold. After the crash, Spain never returned to building enough new homes. The construction industry had been gutted, and skilled laborers had moved abroad for work. Meanwhile, the government failed to invest in public housing, leaving Spain with one of the lowest levels of social housing in Europe. Fast forward to today, and the impact is clear. Young people can't afford to buy homes, so they're stuck renting. But with higher demand for rentals, prices have shot through the roof. In Madrid, Barcelona, and Valencia, rents have skyrocketed by over 50% since 2015, while wages have barely moved. More than 65% of Spaniards aged 25 to 34 still live with their parents, the highest rate in Europe. Spain's housing crisis didn't appear out of nowhere. A perfect storm of reckless lending, a banking collapse, and government inaction created it. Now, the country's paying the price. Why isn't Spain building more homes? The solution is simple: build more homes. But it's not that easy. First, land prices in Spain's major cities are incredibly high, making it difficult for developers to build affordable housing. Second, much of the country's available housing is in the wrong places. While Madrid and Barcelona face severe shortages, rural areas are full of abandoned properties. There's no incentive to build where demand is low.
That would imply somewhere that's been deserted, but most of the 30,000 who were supposed to live here never came. Weeds grow in the untended gardens and the playgrounds are silent.
Third, Spain's rental laws are a mess. Landlords often prefer to leave properties vacant rather than deal with long-term tenants, fearing rent controls and eviction delays. This has led to thousands of empty apartments in cities where people desperately need housing. Finally, corruption and bureaucracy have stalled progress. In many cities, real estate developers have strong political ties, influencing housing policies in their favor. Meanwhile, government programs to increase social housing have been slow and ineffective. Where do we go from here? Fixing Spain's housing crisis won't be easy, but there seem to be some straightforward steps that could make a difference. For one, massive investment in public housing would be necessary. Spain needs a large-scale public housing program to provide affordable homes for low and middle-income families. Stronger regulations on short-term rentals are also crucial. Limiting the number of Airbnbs and enforcing strict rules could help free up homes for locals. Imposing taxes on vacant properties might also help. Penalizing investors who leave homes empty could push more properties back into the market. This, of course, would require fairer wages and better job security. Without higher salaries and stable employment, many Spaniards will be unable to afford housing.